Hi, everyone, and welcome to my podcast. Today, I'm going to talk with you about our first responders and the tough calls they go on, and how those calls affect them, and why emotional agility training, ongoing counseling, and crisis support is critical to not only help them get through those calls, but to maintain their sanity over the long term, so that they can have a high quality of life and healthy relationships and all that stuff that all the rest of us enjoy. So I guess I'll start by saying, as if their jobs weren't hard enough already, the recent last couple of years with the political campaigns of the Antifa and defund the police, cities all over the nation, people disrespecting our law enforcement, the budget cuts, it's just... I have so much respect for our first responders who just stick with it and have a sense of integrity, to protect their communities. To me, I just feel like we owe them so much gratitude for protecting us and sacrificing, as if they didn't sacrifice enough already, is basically what I'm saying. Now their jobs are even harder. So that was kind of, for those of you who didn't see my other podcast, that was kind of what got me into this. Was I was already working with the veterans through the Choice program and the psych armor training. But when my nephew joined the San Jose Police Department, then I started thinking, well, who has our law enforcement's backs? And then I looked online and saw that basically nobody had their backs. So at least in our area, there was a 300-mile radius black hole of support. So that's why I decided last fall, to start my own certification process, make sure that I became trained, so I was qualified to work with this population. So by, January or so, I think. So I became a certified first responder counselor. I earned my clinical trauma professional certification. The third one I got was the certified peer support team leader/trainer. So I can train people to not only be in peer support teams in various agencies, but I can also be the leader and train the leader. And I'm really excited about doing that. So we'll see how that goes. And by the way, I will put a link down below for any clinicians who want to also get involved with that so you can go and get your certifications where I got mine. So I think that's something we should all do. But anyway, I just want to start out by saying, just like I said in one of my previous podcasts, I wish I could say that most first responders entered into their careers as courageous individuals. They knew what they were going to sacrifice, and they were willing to sacrifice it anyway. But I really think that they were a little bit naive in not knowing the toll that their job was going to take on them, and it's not their fault. I think it's the fault of the academies that train them. So I'm going to talk about that here too. But for me, at least, going into this, and I talked about this in my intro podcast, I can't help but keep going back to the Keanu Reeves character Neo Anderson in The Matrix, where in the very beginning he's given a choice to take a red pill or a blue pill. If he takes the red pill, he's going to be detached from his little safe cocoon where he has been living in safety and living this fantasy life. But if he takes the blue pill, he can go back to the cocoon and never know anything about it. But he chooses to take the red pill in order to see what is really going on, which is the war against the machines, right? It's like a really ugly situation. But he's willing to do that. And I kind of feel like I already know, especially law enforcement, but maybe responders in general, tend to get a very skewed negative view of the world around them based on all the negative interactions they have throughout the day with their community. If it's like people committing crimes or lying to them, being violent, all that stuff. So I knew going in, and this was something I had to give a lot of thought to, and I encourage any clinician thinking also to get into working with this population to do the same. really consider the fact that when you are going to be meeting with your first responder clients, you have to consider, hey, I'm going to be seeing the world through their eyes now. And am I okay with that? Like, am I going to be okay seeing the world differently from this point forward? And for me, I am. I am willing to hear about all the gruesome cases they have to deal with, the child sex abuse stuff. I'm willing to go there with them, to walk that dark, ugly mile with them, because for me, I feel like I owe them for all that they've sacrificed for me all these years that I didn't know anything about and didn't appreciate. And now I have a way to pay it back. So for me, it's like me paying my personal debt to them, that I'm willing to go there and sacrifice my cocooned existence to go there with them into that dark place and forever see the world in a different way. However, I'm also going to practice what I preach and practice self-care and make sure I have a personal life with positive experiences so that I can offset the negativity with the positives. So, and that's something that I hope to teach my responders in the trainings and in the counseling, is if they don't have a personal life, if all they have is their career, then they have way too much negativity and their life gets off balance, and then that affects their mental well-being. So, I don't know, I just keep going back to that Matrix movie because I really do I feel like that's really what's happening. So, I'm going to be, glancing down at my laptop here a little bit, and as usual, I'll be rambling off as much as possible. So I came up with this idea that I wish first responder careers came with a warning label. So, like, the label could say something like, caution, this career may be harmful to your health. While it may pump you up and make you feel great as a respectable contributor and protector of your community, and provide you on a straight shot, rapid route to self-efficacy and actualization, the truth is, without adequate emotional agility training and ongoing psychological support, this career can also lure you down a slippery spiral of cognitive and emotional exhaustion, depression, anxiety, anger, social isolation, and suicidality. So that would be my warning label for responder careers. Here's why I say that, because you're probably thinking that's drastic. So here's why I say that. So what's the problem? The problem is there's little or no awareness and therefore appreciation for the importance of self-care. And there's no appreciation for the harmful effects of hypervigilance, which is almost normalized, like it's a tool, like it's a way to get a little shot of adrenaline, like it's a good thing. So I'm going to really go into detail on that and how the brain works and how PTSD is developed. Because I think unless you really understand how things like can go wrong, then you're not going to appreciate the solution that I'm going to give you. Like, you're going to say, why do I need you? So I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you why you need me. So I'm going to be bringing up this word emotional agility throughout my podcast. And you're probably wondering, what does that mean? Basically, I see emotional agility training as being not much different from you putting on a bulletproof vest. So you have something physical that's going to protect your body from bullets and knives or whatever sharp is going to come at you. I see emotional agility training as a way of, in the veteran counseling that I do, we call it psych armor, which I think is an amazing term. But the emotional agility training is going to be a way of protecting your sanity, of protecting your mind and your relationships and your quality of life, just all that goes with that. So that's what emotional agility training is in my mind. It's just a way to protect. It's like think of it as a psych armor, like we use in the veteran world. So I think I can help you understand how emotional agility can protect your mind if I tell you how the brain works. So I'm going to give you a little bit of threat response 101. I guess this is Shara's Threat Response 101 class now. All right. So just like your house has a smoke detector, your brain has a threat detector, and that is called the amygdala. It's actually down in the center of your brain, in the middle here, and it's where all the sensory information comes in and very quickly, rapidly, efficiently gets to the amygdala right away, because it's the amygdala that helps you detect threats in your environment that are going to save your life. So it's got to be a very efficient pathway. So your all this sensory information, senses, right? Sight, smell, touch, hearing. If your amygdala is your threat detector and everything comes in through there, the question is, how does your amygdala know what is a threat? So that's where another brain part comes in, and that's called the hippocampus. Actually, you have two hippocampus, so plural of that would be hippocampi. And you have one on each side. And they look like little seahorses. That's where the word hippocampus, hippo, horse, that's where that word came from. Just a little trivia there. So hippocampi really is the plural word, but in the field we just call it hippocampus because we're lazy. So if I go back and forth, don't freak out about it. So the hippocampi, what their role is to encode memories or to hold memories for you. They hold information. So what happens is your amygdala gets all the sensory information, but it doesn't know what to do with it. So it's going to check in with the hippocampus, and it's going to say, hey, do we have any information on this? Like, here's an example that I learned in my trauma professional training thing recently. They said, let's say you're sitting in your living room on the couch, and a cat walks across the room on the floor, and your brain looks at it, and how does your amygdala know, is that a saber-toothed tiger that's going to kill me? Or is that the family cat? Your amygdala, within milliseconds, gets the information, goes to the hippocampus, checks in, like a Rolodex, right? It's checking through all your memories. Oh, there's a cat. Yep, we had a cat for 10 years. His name's Charlie. And he's right there. And he's like arthritic. He's going to die soon. He's definitely not a threat. So he's fine. You don't have to worry about him. No need to engage threat response, fight or flight. You're going to be fine. In that way, hippocampus tells your amygdala, turn off the threat response. No need to activate. You're fine. Everything's good. All right. That's great. Hopefully, throughout your daily life, that's what's happening. You're getting in your car. You're driving down the road. You're going to your job, going to a restaurant, taking your kids to soccer. Whatever you're doing, hopefully your amygdala is getting all this information and checking with your hippocampus. It goes through its little Rolodex, right? And then it says, oh, that's no big deal. We know that that's safe. We've done this before. We've been here before. Everything's cool. So what happens? What if that cat really was a saber-toothed tiger, though? What would happen in that case? Okay, well, we know that our brain has evolved over, I don't know how many thousands of years the human being has been around, but probably a very long time, and there's a reason that our brain has developed the way it has to keep us alive, so we can live to procreate, right? So we're hardwired to survive. Amygdala, very important brain part. What happens if something is a threat? Let's say there is a saber-toothed tiger coming into your living room, and you look at it, it goes to your amygdala goes to the hippocampus, it asks, hey, check the Rolodex. Is that Charlie the cat? No, that actually I think that's a saber-toothed tiger. Get the hell out of here. So that happens in milliseconds. That happens really quickly. So now you're going into threat response, also known as the fight or flight. Fight or flight, as we know, was developed to keep us safe. It's a survival mechanism. Body is not designed to be in it for long, maybe 1 to 2 minutes. And I guess the idea is either you've outrun the threat or it got you and ate you and you're dead anyway. But you're not designed to be in a threat response, that fight or flight, for a long time. Unfortunately, these days, we can't outrun our stresses. Like, you can't outrun your taxes. You can't outrun, problems with relationships, whatever. And so we tend to dwell on it. And that's how PTSD, like ongoing stress, depression, all that stuff kind of can get developed. But at any rate, going back to the threat, you run away from the thing and then you relax, you're fine, or you're dead, one or the other. Either way, basically, so what happens is when you detect the threat, that saber-toothed tiger, certain things are triggered in your brain when you go into that fight or flight. One of the things that happens is your cortex, which is the thinking part, that's that wrinkled part, like on the outside of the brain, it starts to shut down. So why would that be? Well, because you don't want to take time to think about running away from the saber-toothed tiger. You just want to run. So it's kind of a run first, think later situation. So there's a reason when you go into fight or flight, when you go into a threat response, the thinking part of the brain shuts down. So this is why it's critical to have emotional agility training for our first responders, because they can't be out on calls having their cortex shut down. How are they going to control chaotic situations? How are they going to make split-second life or death decisions when the thinking part of their brain is shutting down? Not only that, I'll go into it in a minute here, but that's also how they're going to get PTSD. And so this is all kind of like sneak preview of exciting things to come. But anyway, so we know the amygdala is the threat detector. We know that the hippocampus is our little Rolodex of memories. It's going to go through that. And if it's a threat, it's going to stimulate the brain to go into fight or flight, shut down the cerebral cortex. If it's not a threat, you're going to just go on your life as normal. You're going to be just fine. Another thing that happens when you go into threat response is your amygdala sends signals to your body to prepare for fight or flight. So not only does the cerebral cortex shut down, also your body decides, you know what, digesting all that food I just ate is not really a priority right now. I need all my blood going out to my arms and legs so I can run really fast or defend myself. So digestion slows down. So we know people with chronic stress, they get ulcers because of that threat response. I mean, it's all going to make sense as I go along here, I hope. But anyway, so our brains have evolved to protect us. These are all hardwired in us. The stress is not a good thing. The stress response, the threat response is meant to protect us, to keep us alive, but only in very stressful situations and only for 1 or 2 minutes. We're not supposed to be living in a stressful state. It's not healthy for us. And these poor responders are sent into a career without the protection they need to cope with the situations they're going to be in. And so they're just being thrown in like almost like doomed. They're almost set to fail. They're set to be stressed out, and they're set to be into this threat response where if they're a good responder, unfortunately, the way that the responder community is set up right now, if they're a good responder, they're almost doomed to go into a threat response, because the hypervigilance is almost part of the culture. Like, it's a good thing. You know, like I was saying, it's like a shot of adrenaline kind of. I mean, it's looked at like, oh, it's not a big deal. Actually, it is a huge deal. I mean, being vigilant is one thing, but hypervigilant is another. So think of that classic story of the mom who sees her baby under a car and she gets this, adrenaline surge and she lifts the car to save the baby. So people think, oh, well, that hypervigilance must be a good thing then. But it's not. In fact, a lot of people erroneously believe the hypervigilance is just an extra shot of adrenaline, and it's going to help them to defend themselves and to run faster and to fight better. But actually, research shows otherwise. And they say that most people come to realize that on their own once they start to learn martial arts. That's when they realize, wow, the calmer I am, the more my body and mind are in unison. The more I go inward with my mind, the better fighter I am, the stronger fighter I am. So hypervigilance, I think it's a myth that people think that it's a tool to use. It's not. It's not a good thing. Also, when I was saying that the threat response state is not a healthy state for people to be in long term, you have to also realize that when you're in that state, not only is blood leaving your stomach, which could cause ulcers and all kinds of digestive issues, it's also affecting your insulin in your blood. It's affecting cortisol levels from your adrenals. And those kind of things long term can cause serious health problems with cardiovascular system. It can cause diabetes. I mean, have you ever wondered why we have so many overweight cops? And like why after 5 years they come out of the academy buff and feeling good. They love exercise. But like 5 years down the road, they start kind of falling apart, and you're just like, this guy is not going to be able to catch a bad guy because he can't even hardly walk. Like, why? How did he get so heavy? And it's not that they're even lazy or that they're even eating bad food, which most of them are eating bad food. I know that because they don't have time to eat good food, or at least they don't think they have time to eat good food. But this stress, the stress reaction causes the body to put the weight on. That's another reason for emotional agility training, is it could save their lives. It could save them from having a heart attack, if nothing else. But it could also help them stay in shape and be healthier. So obviously, first responders going on tough calls, the first thing that comes to mind is PTSD, right? I mean, that's how a lot of careers are ended, unfortunately, is because our first responders develop PTSD, and they either go out on a workers' comp claim, or maybe they even commit suicide, which is really scary and sad. because it's so preventable. I just think that's such a tragedy that here they're sacrificing their life. They're risking their life every day to save us, and then they sacrifice their life in suicide. It's such a tragedy. I don't know why people aren't more aware of that. Okay, so now I'm going to explain the connection between how the brain works and PTSD and why it's relevant to our first responders and all the training that they need to get through their job, and how if they had the training, they would not develop PTSD. And I know that sounds like a really confident comment to make, but I'm trust me on this. I'm not joking. This is for real. This is real stuff. All right. I already explained that when you go into the threat response, your cerebral cortex shuts down. Well, guess what happens with your thinking brain? Language. Your words, your thoughts with words, right? So if your cerebral cortex is shutting down, also what is shutting down is your language. So here's what happens when you're in a traumatic situation. So, I don't know if you realize this, but the hippocampus, and also actually your memories are stored throughout the brain. We know that there are a lot of connections all over the place, but your brain is like a recorder, and it is recording everything that happens to you. Cumulative. It is just keeping a record of everything that you experience. We know that by the time you're 3 years old or whenever you learn to talk, at that point or from that point on, every memory that your brain encodes it's like a dual set of information. You have the sensory information, right? Like, oh, that felt great, or that really sucked, or that felt scary, or whatever was the senses, and it was sensory and emotional. Whatever was your internal experience about what happened, that gets encoded. But also the language, the narrative gets encoded. So what words were attributed to, oh, we went to that concert, we had a great time. Or it was my mother's birthday and blah, blah, blah. Whatever was the, memory, there are going to be words attached. And so there are two sets of information being recorded with each memory. All right, so let's make a scenario here. Let's say you're a first responder, call comes in to 911, which already is going to get your blood pressure up. There's been a big car accident on Highway 5. You got to go out and deal with that. So you show up to that. There, cars on fire, bodies burning, people crying, more traffic coming, maybe who knows what else is going on, but you have a lot going on, and maybe you don't have a lot of backup, because at least in our small town, we don't. The more your brain goes into a threat response, if you start to panic, the more your cortex starts to shut down. As your cortex shuts down, your brain is always recording the emotions and feelings, sensory information, the odor. Maybe you can smell a body burning. Maybe you smell gasoline. Maybe you're smelling burnt rubber tires. Who knows? You're hearing, maybe the car siren is on. You're hearing the horn. All the sights, sounds, tastes, smells, everything. That is being recorded. What's not going to be recorded, unfortunately, is the narrative. Because as your cortex shuts down, that language component is not being encoded with it. Guess what's included in the narrative? Is a timestamp. So, if you are encoding all that negative emotion, the panic, the fear, the terrible sensory information without the timestamp, your brain doesn't know when that event happened, and it might think that event is perpetually happening. So your brain doesn't know that event stopped. It doesn't know, I went to that call, I did what I was trained to do, I helped everybody that I could help. Maybe somebody didn't make it, maybe somebody got injured, somebody died. It was a horrible day. I did the best I could. I feel good about what I did. I don't think I could have done anything better, but that's in the past. I'm in the present, and I'm going to be okay. If you had that language component, you would not have PTSD. You would be okay. Not only that, if you had the emotional agility training, you wouldn't have gone into the threat response in the first place. Your body could have stayed relaxed. You could have used your cortex to make good decisions. Maybe more people would be alive. Maybe you could coordinate your team to be more effective, more efficient. And you wouldn't have even gotten into that threat response in the first place. So you would have recorded the narrative with it. So you could have prevented the PTSD, which would be the whole idea, right, of the emotional agility training. In fact, that's part of the treatment of it, is bringing that memory back up, adding the narrative, and then re-encoding it. So I know it seems kind of crazy, but we know from all the technology and research these days with brain scans that it's actually very doable. We know how trauma is, we know how the brain reacts to threats, and we know how PTSD gets started. In fact, some people in the mental health field have begun to say that PTSD is the result of erroneously encoded memories because of that lacking narrative component. So if you can keep your cerebral cortex active and it can record the language component, then by theory, you could prevent PTSD. So I think that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, one of the things we're learning about the amygdala is that once your threat detector gets kind of activated and you develop PTSD, it actually goes into this state of sensitization where it becomes more and more sensitive to everything in your environment. So instead of just one thing being a threat, now something else is a threat, and now something else is a threat, and something else is a threat. Because your amygdala is just firing. It's just like going into threat response left and right. So one of the things that we do in therapy is to help desensitize the amygdala, help slow it down, help it not keep making all these triggers for you, because that can become debilitating. That can take, a courageous responder and turn that person into just this anxious, debilitated human being that doesn't even want to leave the house. It can get that bad. And here's another thing too. If you get to that point where your brain is making all these triggers everywhere, it's like everything is seen as a threat, not only that's going to affect you, obviously, it's going to affect, if you have children, it's going to affect the way you parent your children. It's going to affect the way you interact with your spouse. It's going to affect almost every aspect of your life is going to be affected. Like, I can't even think of one part of your life that won't be affected by that. But I think it's a shame when that then, affects your children, if nothing else, because then it's a whole other generation. So my last podcast for my responders was about coping. And one of the ways they can cope is with alcohol. So that seems like the next obvious topic to bring up here is, let's say you have been on some rough calls. Maybe they involve kids. Maybe they involve people dying in front of your eyes. Maybe they involve people trying to talk to you, but they can't because half their jaw's missing, their face is missing, they're on fire, their skin is melting. Like, these people see some unbelievable things. Well, not only they see them, they smell them. They might have to taste them. If they're doing CPR, they are going to hear it. It's going to be on their clothes. They're going to take it home. I mean, it's an intimate experience for these responders. It's not just like seeing it on TV. They are immersed with this experience. So they're going to need to cope. Like I said in the coping podcast, unfortunately, it's going to be the best responders that are going to be more at risk for this, because they're going to think, I got this under control. I'm a problem solver. I'm a responder. I can handle this. And they don't want people to worry about them. They don't want, for sure, the loved ones to worry about them, but they also don't want their supervisors at work to worry about them because they don't want it to affect their job. So they probably figure, look, I just need to unwind. I'll go home, have a drink, or I'll go home, have a joint, or I'll go home, play some video games, or watch some Netflix, tune out, and everything will be fine. The only problem is, usually the way that responders pick to cope or to kind of self-medicate, escape the pain or the anxiety, the things that they choose to do tend to do them in isolation, so they get more and more socially isolated. And number two, they're not sustainable. So, for example, let's talk about drinking, right? So you're drinking, you're going home, you're having a drink to relax. If you're drinking, you could eventually get a DUI. You could eventually kill somebody, kill yourself, or injure somebody or whatever. If you're intoxicated outside of work, even if somebody wants to come and do something fun with you, whether it's your children or your buddies, like they want to go, fishing or do something fun. Maybe you're going to be too drunk. You can't even go do that. Worse than that, what happens when you come home from work, can't wait to crack open that IPA, and you get a call from the station. Hey, we need you. We need you to come. We got an emergency. We're short-staffed, or we need you on the scene to help us manage this emergency. You're intoxicated. First of all, how are you going to drive there, right? And how are you going to help when you're drunk? So it's just not sustainable. As innocent as it is, it's not illegal to drink. It's not like it's an evil thing to do, but it's not sustainable. And also the more time that goes by that you're doing that, the more you need to drink to get that same feeling. And even when you're not drinking at work, your brain is missing that buzzed feeling. So your brain is getting more anxious, looking for that relaxation when you're buzzed. So you're basically perpetuating and increasing your anxiety. It's just not sustainable. And whether you're using alcohol or drugs or video games or whatever, gambling, whatever you're using for coping to escape the pain, not only it doesn't fix the problem that is causing you to need to escape, but now it's going to add a whole other layer of problems to your life that you're going to have to deal with, which you're not dealing with because you're not even dealing with the original problem, right? So you're not going to be dealing with this whole new layer of problems. And the other thing that I brought up in that other podcast about coping was that usually these self-medicating behaviors or these, escape behaviors are kind of they're incongruent with the ideals of a responder. So, in other words, it kind of brings in a whole new, very destructive component known as shame. So now, if you had a responder that wasn't going to get help before when he felt bad, he's for sure not going to get help now because he doesn't want people to know he's drinking, or he doesn't want people to know he's addicted to drugs or porn or gambling or whatever it is that he's doing to escape, because that is not what responders do. So now you've not only not addressed your original problem, you've added another problem, and you've added the component of shame. So there's 3 layers there of problems. And all of that contributes to the downward spiral that I was talking about in the beginning. So some of these escape behaviors, these self-medicating behaviors, can not only get you fired, but they might get you divorced, because it makes sense if you have been choosing these coping behaviors that are further isolating you. So I just want to clarify who's most at risk with this. I'm not saying responders who do this are weak in any way or not good responders. As I've said in my previous podcast, and I've already said in this podcast, I believe that the better a responder is, the stronger they are, the more dedicated they are to their job and to their community, the more they're going to not reach out for help in the very beginning when they need to. They're going to think they can handle it, and they're going to go in that downward spiral. Because I think they may not even realize how much they're sacrificing for their job and for their community. My guess is they're probably just, they have they're so focused on doing their job and protecting their community, they're not even thinking about themselves. So I don't even think they realize how much they're going to be at risk for that. There are 3 types of trauma that our responders can experience in their day-to-day calls. The first one is acute trauma, which obviously means it's a serious event and they were very affected by it, and their life changes from that day forward because of it, and they have to deal with that to get their life back to normal. Another type of trauma that our responders can experience is called cumulative trauma. I think this is a more common type because it isn't necessarily that a particular call is so troubling that it changes their life from that day forward, but over time, their brain is keeping a record of like call after call after call after call. And these could be calls like finding kids in bad situations at home with negligent parents. Maybe the parents are drug addicts or homeless or whatever. And maybe the responder is just developing sort of this internal anger about seeing these kids in these situations, and maybe the responder feels helpless about it, or maybe even a little guilty that they can't do more to help the kids. So that would be a cumulative trauma that would add up over time and maybe result in a break later, like a breakdown later. And then the third type of trauma that our responders tend to experience is called vicarious trauma. So that means somebody else is in trouble, but you feel it as if you're the one in trouble. So you're witnessing somebody else almost dying, or their life is at risk somehow, and so they see somebody in a house that's on fire, maybe barely makes it out. That person almost died, and the responder feels like they also almost died because of their empathy, and their mirror neurons kicked in, and then they felt like, oh, I almost died in the fire, so that's vicarious trauma. And then that, like I said in my other podcast, can actually go a third layer where, let's say somebody's kid drowns in the lake and you see it and you get traumatized because you feel like your kid drowned in the lake. And then you go home and you don't let your kids swim anymore. So with vicarious trauma, it can actually go layer after layer. So you're affected by somebody else almost dying, and then maybe your behavior changes in such a way that you affect people around you. So I think that the clearest example of that would be a responder who has children. So if the responder is affected by something that happens at work vicariously, and then they go home and it changes the way they interact with their children, that would be one more layer of vicarious trauma affecting like another whole group of people, the children. And so that's not healthy, obviously. We definitely need to intervene with that with our emotional agility training. So you can think of the emotional agility training as not only helping the responder, it helps the responder be more effective on the job, so it helps the community, and it also helps the responder to be a more healthy member of their family. So it helps them to be a better spouse and a better parent. And so that obviously helps their children. And then that would help their children grow up to be healthier adults, and then they can have healthy children. So it's important that we take care of our responders. Let's just put it that way. There was one story of trauma that kind of took me by surprise, and that was it was a lady who was a medic in the Army, and I believe they were in the Middle East somewhere. She was supposed to take care of the new mothers with their newborn babies, and at the time she was not married, she did not have children, and she was not at all affected by her duties. She just got through it just fine. Got home. 2 years later, she finds the man of her dreams, gets married, has a baby. All of a sudden, that baby starts crying, and she just loses it. For some reason, something happened when she was in the service with those young moms and their new babies. Something got encoded in there that came out later, and she really fell apart and had to get a lot of help for that. So that makes me wonder, like, that's really weird. So that means you could experience a situation, come out of it, think you're fine, and years later have it ruin your life. That's weird, but it's true. So that makes me wonder, how could emotional agility training have protected her from that? I don't know, to be honest. I don't know. Because I don't know if she went into the threat response in that situation, so I don't really even know how that would fit together. But definitely something we have to learn more about if we're going to help our veterans and our responders. One thing I mentioned about, so I'm going to go back to my hypervigilance spiel. I mentioned some things from Gil Martin's book about, for example, if you are hypervigilant in your shifts at work, right? Especially the new recruits, coming to their new job, they're trying to do everything right, make sure that they remember what they were trained to do, and they want their superiors to be happy with their performance, and they want to stay safe, and they want to be effective and do a good job. So it makes sense that, especially with the young recruits, that they would be hypervigilant in the beginning of their careers. And also, they're all gung-ho. They're excited about their job. They're probably flying high, right? I mean, that's exciting. Like, you got your uniform on, you're going to go out and keep you're contributing to your community, you're keeping everybody safe, people are going to respect you. I mean, that's all like win-win-win right there. The only problem is, just like people who use ecstasy all weekend, there's going to be a day you need to crash because your brain can only make so much dopamine. So if you're hypervigilant during your shift, and then you come home, the minute you walk through the door, you finally let your guard down, your brain relaxes, that's when it's going to start the recovery. That's when it's going to crash, and that's when you're going to feel tired and cranky. Unfortunately, that's when you're with your loved ones. So if you didn't have the education and the awareness of what hypervigilance is, you would just assume, hey, how come I feel so great at work? As soon as I come home, I feel like shit with the wife and kids. Maybe I'm going to spend less time with the wife and kids and I won't feel so shitty. I mean, that would make sense, right? Like, that's common sense. If something makes you feel bad, you just do less of it, right? So you might work more overtime if it's available to stay away from the house and to stay at work. Or you might go out for some choir practice, right? Go out for some beers with the guys after your shift. And anything to delay that going home and crashing, that crappy sensation. Ironically, I mean, it's ironic and it's kind of sad that it's actually the time with the wife and kids, going out and doing fun things, going out, getting a little exercise, some fresh air. That's actually what you need to feel better. But what you would probably do if you didn't know better, you would just say, being home makes me feel like shit, so I'm just not going to go home. Or when I do go home, I'm just going to zone out. I'm just going to get in my recliner and watch my Netflix, have my beer, and I'm not going to talk to anybody or do anything. I'm just going to chill out. So it's really important, I think it's just really important that our responders get the education that they need and that we increase the awareness within the responder culture itself so that, it might be hard in the beginning, but so people aren't looking at hypervigilance like it's a good thing. They should actually be more aware of it. Like, oh, maybe it's a bad thing, and maybe it's going to affect my relationship with my loved ones at home, and it's going to affect my energy level, and it's just a waste of cognitive energy to be hypervigilant all the time. It's just unnecessary, and it's not good for you. And if you think back to the martial arts comment I made earlier, we know you're going to be a more effective responder if you can stay in your body, if you can stay calm and connected with your body, your mind and body connection. So you're not even doing yourself a favor by letting your brain get hypervigilant. That's why the education is so important, I think. So what do we do about it? If you're lucky, if you're a responder, your agency will have a peer support team or a wellness program of some sort. If you live in Canada, you're really lucky because they have a mental health component within each agency. Just right down the hall, you can just go talk to a therapist, no problem. Unfortunately, in America, we don't have that. In fact, in America, there's such a freaking stigma about mental health. People, even if they have access to it, are afraid to seek it out. So if your agency does not have a peer support team or an officer wellness program, then what do? You're going to have to seek out someone like me. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot like me because I'm the only one in 300-mile radius from my community as of January when I got certified. For that reason, I'm going to keep, I'm going to be on my campaign here to try to encourage and inspire all my colleagues and all the psych majors out there to consider first responders as their population to work with. Please consider that. Like I said, I will put the link below so you can go online and get your certification too and learn more about this culture. Because like I said in my intro podcast, if you go to see just any therapist, it's probably not going to be a good experience because that therapist is not going to be aware of your culture, a first responder culture. They may not get your dark humor. They may not like you coming into their office with your sidearm. They may not, they're not going to be ready to hear about all the trauma. They're not going to be ready. They will be vicariously traumatized by your stories. And you're going to pick up on that. And you are going to then start self-censoring what you're saying in your sessions because you don't want to hurt your therapist. And you're not going to get as much help from that therapist as you should, because that therapist won't be able to walk in those dark places with you. So that's the sad part, is most therapists, even though they would have good intentions and want to help you, they're not going to be qualified to help you. So you might be wondering, hey, let's say I decide I want to come see you. How's that going to work? What happens? So first, obviously, you're going to contact me. I'm going to send you some intake paperwork to fill out for me. So our first session, once you give me the paperwork, I go through it. Then our first session that we're going to set up is going to be your intake assessment. And it's usually an hour, hour and a half. And we will go over the paperwork if there are any questions and talk about your symptoms, your little bit of background, and then your treatment goals. Like what do we want to get out of our time together? So that's the intake assessment. Then we will start meeting. Normally we meet for weekly sessions, but sometimes it's every other week depending on your schedule. And that's when we get to work. So from the first session all the way to however many sessions we have, we would be building rapport, working towards the treatment goals. I would also be teaching you mindfulness, which kind of, if I had to say like in a little sentence, would be developing a sense of self-compassion and self-curiosity as you explore your feelings. So you would be, let's say you have anger comes up. You would let your feelings kind of reveal themselves. Like one really great image described to me years ago was as a river. Your feelings are like going down a river. So with the mindfulness, you would use self-compassion and self-curiosity to sort of look upstream of the river and see, oh, what feelings are coming down? Oh, I feel jealous about this. I wonder what that's all about. Or where's that coming from? Instead of judging yourself, and also instead of letting it stick to you and become who you are, then you let that go and you let it flow downstream. And then you look upstream again to see what is the next feeling that comes down. Oh, this one is sadness. That's weird. I wonder where is that coming from? So you're being self-compassionate and you're being self-curious as you're evaluating these feelings coming. And you're just letting them go because you are not your feelings. Your feelings just come and go. They're not who you are. So if you feel jealous, it doesn't mean you're a jealous person. It just means you felt jealous at that moment. And you can, with self-compassion and self-curiosity, explore that. So I would be teaching you mindfulness, because also mindfulness helps you stay in your body. The other thing I would be teaching you in our counseling together is the importance of self-care. As I said earlier, that's one of the problems I see in the responder culture as being underappreciated. I don't even know if there's an awareness of it, but there's definitely not much appreciation of it. And in fact, most of the responders I talked to about self-care said they felt guilty just even thinking about it, let alone practicing it. As I said in my intro podcast, when I was in grad school, we were lectured from our professors about self-care. And of course, in grad school, who practices self-care as a student anyway, right? But as a grad student who's also going into a caregiving field, that's even less reason for us to practice self-care. So the professor said, you don't understand. It's not a luxury. You have to practice self-care if you want to be effective and if you don't want to burn out. They said if you don't have, for example, if you don't have a personal life, you don't have friends, you don't go out and do things on the weekends or after hours during the week, you're going to probably be getting your social needs met through your clients then. So basically your clients are going to become your friends. So then you're going to be breaking all these boundary violations and maybe even be vulnerable to some lawsuits. So when I heard that, I thought, okay, I will practice self-care. So anyway, it had to be put to me that way for me to get it. And so that's why I'm putting it that way for you to also get it. And I wish more institutions, drove it home like our professors did for all the other careers, or for all the other caregiving professions. And so that's something that I will continue to lecture about, to make sure that people understand. If you want to be a good responder, you have to practice self-care. You don't have a choice. Besides, like I've said in my other podcasts, you take good care of your vehicle, right? Why wouldn't you take care of yourself? Why do you take care of your vehicle? You want it to run well? You want it to last long? Well, don't you want your body and your mind to run well and to last long? So you have to practice self-care. It doesn't mean you're hedonistic. It doesn't mean you're selfish. It means you appreciate your body and mind, and you want them to last a long time and be healthy. You want to take care of yourself. Also, you want to be a good role model for others, and especially if you have children, you want to be a good role model to them to also practice self-care for themselves. Another thing we might do if you came to see me as a counselor is I might assign some homework assignments in between sessions. For example, if I felt you still had some underlying feelings that aren't coming out, maybe you have a hard time expressing them, maybe they're too painful, you don't even want to access those. Maybe it's a subconscious, coping mechanism won't let you access them. So one way that we can get through that is through therapeutic journaling. So I might say, hey, how about before we meet next week, you get a nice little journal and take some time and just start writing, and don't censor it. Just let it out. Just purge everything. Let it out. Because what happens is when your brain is sort of focused on the act of writing, it's not paying attention to censoring stuff. So it's kind of like board games. When in my grad school internship at the county children's system of care, I used to have these little therapy board games that I used to bring to the elementary schools where I used to work with the kids, and they would get so excited about the game, rolling the die and picking up the card and reading what it said, that they would forget to be embarrassed to talk about their feelings, and they would get some pretty good work done, just getting so involved in the game. So I think journaling does the same thing, and basically any experiential therapeutic intervention. The idea is that you get involved in the activity of it, and then it frees up that inner critic in your brain, and it lets feelings come out that otherwise might be really repressed. So I might have you do some journaling. I might have you make a collage of something. That's another really kind of relaxing activity, is to cut pictures out of magazines of things that make you happy. Making collages are fun. Let's see what else. Oh, let me touch base on the self-medicating thing, because I know for people who are self-medicating, that behavior almost becomes like a security blanket. And the last thing I would want to do is rip that from you if you need it, because I understand escape behaviors are a tool and you're using it as a tool. So why would I rip that tool from you if it's at least momentarily kind of helping you? So here's how I would approach that. Let's say you're drinking or using drugs or something. My hope would be that I would empower you to outgrow the need for that self-medication. So in other words, instead of saying you can't drink, or how many beers did you have last week, or instead of fixating on whatever is the behavior that you're doing to cope, self-medicate, I would instead be fixating on what is the thing that's driving you to drink. What is the underlying problem that's leading to this symptom of drinking? So I'm not even going to really fixate on the symptom. I'm going to fixate on what is the underlying issue. Where is the pain that's causing you to need to become numb? So I would hope to empower you, hope to build you up back to the strong person you were before the trauma. And you would, just before you realize it, wow, I don't even need to isolate anymore. I don't even need to self-medicate anymore. I can just have a beer with my buddies and have a good time and socialize with them. But I don't need it to isolate, and I don't need it to medicate. I don't need it to escape. That's when it becomes that's when you know something's not right. So just so you know, like, don't be afraid to, because I would imagine if I were a responder and I'm trying to do a really good job and I'm exposed to some really bad shit and my brain starts acting weird, and then I think, oh, I'm just going to go home and drink it. I'm going to drink and make myself feel better. And then you start drinking more and more and more. And then you're thinking, oh, now I feel shameful about my drinking, and I'm a responder and I should know better. I deal with people drunk driving all the time. I'm cleaning up all these mangled bodies on the freeway. I hate when people drink and drive, and now I'm drinking, so I feel like shit. I would not like focus as much on the drinking, and I would not want you to be afraid to reach out for help for fear of being shamed or for fear of having your preferred self-medication taken from you or in any way pressured from you. So I'm not going to push you to stop drinking or stop using drugs. Instead, like I said, my hope would be that I could help you to not need them. And then you on your own would let them go. Because I know that ripping a security blanket from someone makes them even more panicky, or even the thought of doing that would make them more panicky, and you don't need any more reasons not to come see a counselor if you're in this situation. So I just kind of wanted to point that out. So here's my conclusion. I think I covered most of the bases that I wanted to on this. I think if there's any resistance left in you, if you're a responder in a situation where you know you probably should get some help, but you just can't, like you can't do it, let me just leave you with this idea. What if the roles were reversed? What if you were the counselor and I were in trouble? You would want to reach out. You would want me to come to you, right? Or even as a responder, I know if I were in trouble, you would do anything to save my life. And likewise, as a therapist, I will do anything to save your life. And if the roles were reversed, I know you would do the same for me. There's no doubt in my mind. So I hope you can look at it that way. It's not that you're weak or in any way inadequate. It's that if the roles were reversed, you would do the same for me. So I'm just trying to help reframe it to make it easier for you to reach out for help if you need it. So I just want you to know, like I've said a bazillion times, I'm available 24/7, 365, just like you are. Responders are available 24/7, 365, and so am I. Because you are, I am. So don't be afraid to reach out to me anytime. If you're on a rough call or you're just having a tough time, tough night, just shoot me a text and we will work something out. Maybe we'll just talk on the phone. Maybe I'll meet you out in the field. Maybe I'll meet you wherever you need to meet, and we'll get you through it. It's not only not a problem for me, it's actually my privilege. It's my pleasure to help you. It's the least I can do for all that you've done for me all these years. That's how I see it. So, okay, that's the end of that. I will thank you for watching my podcast. I hope I gave you a little bit of information maybe you didn't have before. If you're a clinician, I hope I'm inspiring you to consider getting certified and working with first responders. If you're a responder, I hope you're considering maybe starting a peer support team or officer wellness program, or maybe reaching out for some counseling if you feel like you need it, or if one of your buddies, at the department maybe could use some counseling. Maybe you can talk him into coming to see me, or somebody like me. Other than that, like I say at the end of every video, thank you for watching. I hope you like and subscribe so that more people can see the video and we can help more responders and more loved ones of responders. So I'm going to leave the comment section open, and I want to hear if you have some ideas. Are there any topics you want me to cover? Do you have any comments about the things that I've said in this podcast? Things you want to dig into a little deeper? Let me know. I want to hear all about it. Let's explore this new frontier and see how can we help our cherished responders to live happy, healthy lives and also I want to just show them that they're appreciated. So, all right, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next podcast. Bye.